Chapter 11 of Ester Ried's Namesake. Ester Ried's Namesake by Pansy. Chapter 11. On the Trail. Oh, I beg your pardon. I think there is a decided difference. I remember I qualified my first sentence with an admission that our forefathers were inclined to be puritanical, but were to be admired in spite of that. However, one can respect the Puritans themselves and honor the heritage they left us, without admiring their foibles or copying their mistakes. I thought you said that their ideas lay at the bottom of all our greatness. I believe I said something of that kind, and meant every syllable. Still I must insist that that does not prevent my smiling at their follies. But are we not getting very wide of the mark? I thought we were discussing the theater, or rather, I was waiting for an affirmative reply to my invitation to attend one. How did we reach the Puritans? Was it over that unfortunate word puritanical? Let me withdraw it. You need not on my account, Ester said coldly. I am a descendant of the Puritans in direct line, and it is one of the few things I have to be proud of. I have the honor of sharing in the same pride, he said quickly, but I admit my anxiety to get back to the question. You will join us on Monday, will you not? Of course you know what the play is? Indiscriminate theater going no one will deplore more than I, but such an opportunity as we have just now is educational as well as delightful. Do you not think that one's judgment should be made use of in these as in other matters? I am not sure what I think, said Ester, and she could not help speaking irritably. But I know what at least some others think. Is not Mr. Palmer himself on record as saying that the chief themes of the theater are the acting out of evil passions, just as they have always been? Who is Mr. Palmer, may I ask? I do not think I have the honor of his acquaintance. Was there a gleam of amusement in his eyes, as well as a note of indulgent tolerance in his voice? Ester felt her face flushing over it. Isn't he recognized as one of the leading theater managers? She asked. I don't know, really. If so, it seems rather mean in him to go back on his business in that way, doesn't it? His careless manner deepened Ester's indignation. She spoke with increased coldness. It is true, I suppose, that the opinions of such persons are of little weight on either side of a question. One does not need to go to them for advice. Possibly you may have heard of Dr. Trumbull. Do you think what he said about play acting is true? I think I know of Dr. Trumbull. He was a leading Sunday school worker, was he not? But I do not recall any deliverances of his concerning theaters. What did he say? Several things. A quotation from his book led me to think about the sort of life the average woman must live who earns her bread on the stage. He said it was possible to portray evil in literature, or in painting, without putting one's self into it, but the successful actor must think and feel as well as act, as though he was the person he personified. When one remembers the class of persons they most frequently personify, I should think that would become an important and serious matter, one that people with any sort of consciences, New England or otherwise, would have to consider. It was clear that Mr. Langham did not want to argue, did not mean to argue. He smiled genially as he said, But I am not urging you to become a play actor, Miss Randall. If you should ever be seriously considering that question, and should honor me by asking my advice, I might have several things to say. Today, however, I protest against anything so serious as an argument. We are out for a holiday, and we, who are unused to play, must bend all our energies toward really playing. Otherwise half the value of our day's outing will be lost. If I mistake not, you are one who especially needs to study the art of playing. You will surely let me give you a lesson in it on Monday afternoon, will you not? I assure you that the entertainment is exceptionally fine. Esther was thoroughly annoyed. She felt that she was being treated like a child, and a very stupid child at that. Her companion not only would not argue, but he would not say any word that was honestly calculated to remove her scruples, and no one could desire more earnestly to have them removed than she did. But her ideas were simply being pushed aside as not worth considering. "Thank you," she said, and her manner was even more haughty than she realized. Your arguments, exhaustive as they are, have not convinced me, and I must therefore decline your invitation with thanks. A puritanical conscience is a troublesome thing sometimes, I will admit, but I am not to blame for having one. The fault, such as it is, must rest with my ancestors. Shall we turn back, Mr. Langham? We have evidently outwalked the girls." She turned as she spoke, and made such good speed that Mr. Langham, who wanted to saunter, had to exert himself to keep pace with her. He was disturbed and puzzled by her manner. It seemed evident that she was offended, yet what had he said to offend her? Whatever her views of the average theatre might be, it was not possible that she was really disturbed at the thought of witnessing the charming play to which he had invited her. If this were really the case, what extreme narrowness of education and former environment it hinted at! There flitted through his mind the half-formed question whether he could hope ever to have sufficient influence to counteract the evils resulting from generations of such narrowness. But he put that thought away quickly, for Professor Langham, indolent as he was that day, and meant to be, was yet very much in earnest about some things, and Esther Randall, even in her ill humor and manifest displeasure with himself, was yet far more interesting to him than was any other woman in the world. All too soon for his plans and hopes they came upon their companions, still hunting ferns, and the professor gave himself to their finding with the zeal of a man bent on an outdoor life. He had not been able, during their rapid walk, to return to a comfortable level again with Esther. His efforts at conversation had been replied to with studied politeness, and with a dignity that would have disheartened a less resolute man. But as he hunted laboriously for the species of fern desired, he told himself that he had been a fool to jam up against the inherited prejudices of generations. What did he care for the matinee? It was only for her sake that he had made it an excuse for the trip. The park or any other inviting place for an hour's outing would have served his purposes quite as well, better indeed, and he had been an idiot not to realize it. As for Esther, her holiday was spoiled. She was angry with Professor Langham, who, she believed, had but half veiled a laugh at her expense; and she was furious against Mr. Spear and Dr. Trumbull and all the rest. What had they done but help her to appear like a fool, and make her shut the door of paradise in her own face? She told herself positively that now she would not go to a matinee nor to anything else with Professor Langham, ever, not if he got down on his knees to petition her; and all the while there was a dull pain at her heart, and a dreary feeling that she had offended him hopelessly, that he would never get down on his knees to her for any purpose, nor give her a chance again to say no to any petition of his. For the remainder of the day she made Faith Farnham her victim. No sooner was the troublesome fern found, and at the same time other members of their party, than she drew Faith aside and spoke hurriedly. "Let us get away, just you and me. Can't we go for a long tramp? I don't want even Blanche." Faith, interested and sympathetic, feeling from Esther's manner as though something must have happened at last, and believing that it was the something of her hopes, managed it as she could most things, and they slipped away. But the confidence that she had looked for was not forthcoming. Instead, Esther, who found it almost impossible to be reasonable, began to enter complaint. "Faith Farnham, why couldn't you have told me about that precious Monday scheme? I think you might at least have mentioned that you were invited." "Monday scheme?" said Faith. "What is it? Oh, do you mean the matinee? Why, I forgot it. We go so often, you know. Did he ask you to go? How delicious! I supposed he would feel that he must take that tiresome Miss Holbrook who is visiting at his sister's. Oh, Esther, I am so glad you are going." "Who said I was going? Of course I am not. I should think that you, at least, might have known that I wasn't. You know very well that I don't go to theatres." "But this isn't a regular theatre, Esther. It is just an afternoon affair, and perfectly unobjectionable. I do hope you didn't refuse. Why, everybody goes to matinees, especially to one of this kind, even ministers." But Esther was in no mood for such argument. "Everybody!" she quoted in infinite scorn. "It seems strange to me that you harp on such a weak statement as that. What earthly difference can it make who goes or doesn't go, if one has a mind capable of deciding for one's self? I know what I think, and, for that matter, what my father thinks, and I don't need Professor Langham, nor even everybody, to sustain me. I don't want to talk about it any more, Faith. Don't let us spoil the entire day, if it is possible to avoid it." Faith resisted the temptation to say that it was Ester's obstinacy which was spoiling the day. She made one brief sharp utterance, or rather began it: "Oh, if you are superior to everybody, of course—" Then she was instantly sorry that she had said this, and began to frame excuses for her friend. Ester was really not to blame; that little reference to her father told volumes. He must be a very narrow, bigoted—but here Faith arrested even her thoughts. She had been very intimate with Ester, and certain breezy, happy letters from that father had been read to her; letters filled, not only with wise suggestions, but with fatherly tendernesses, such as, even during their reading, had caused a stricture at the listener's heart, and a longing wish that she—but her father was good to her. True, he rarely wrote to her; he was too heavily burdened with business cares for her to expect that; but he sent her splendid checks with his love; and if some of the people who worked for him called him hard and unjust, and a few of them hated him, it was no more than business men had to expect at the hands of the lower classes. Faith also meant to be loyal to her father. After that unfinished fling, she linked her arm in Ester's and spoke cheerily: "All right, let us forget controversies of every sort, and just have a good time. Which way shall we go? I should like to explore the canyon farther down, shouldn't you? Isn't this air glorious? I feel as though my lungs reached away down to my mountain boots. Ester, my child, you ought to have worn heavier shoes than those. I am afraid they will be in tatters by night." They walked rapidly, Ester setting the pace and striding on as though she had an appointment for which she was late. She wanted to walk off her excitement and disappointment. Faith, being genuinely anxious to help her, tried various topics of conversation, and finally led the way cautiously toward one of their endless philosophical discussions that by no possibility could have a personal element. Such discussions were often begun in class, and carried on by students who were argumentatively inclined. Ester, being one of those, fell promptly into the trap, and put her other troubles into the background, while she let her indignation burn because Faith could not, or would not, see a certain point as she saw it. Meantime, the day was waning. The excursionists had not planned an early return, as the evenings were charming, but they were to go before dark down to the Half-Way House for supper. This was a picturesque log cabin set in among dense trees, and the mountaineers who lived there were in the habit of serving light refreshments to tourists. The place had become locally famous, and no day's outing on King Mountain was complete without a fish supper at the Half-Way House. The remainder and less difficult portion of the way was to be enjoyed by the light of the glorious moon, which was full that evening. It was Ester who said, at last: "I suppose we ought to turn back; it must be nearly time to start down the mountain." And it was Faith who, after they had walked a short distance on the return trip, said: "Did you notice that queer tree when we came? I am certain we did not pass it, or I should have seen it. I am afraid we made a wrong turn somewhere and are off the trail." "Nonsense," said Ester. "We haven't made any turns. It is not probable that you noticed every tree we passed. How could we be off the trail?" But Faith, who was familiar with mountain trails, and knew that one sometimes slipped into another in a bewildering way, and then led the unwary into far different directions from those desired, made no reply, and looked about her with growing anxiety. She knew that she had observing eyes, and there were strange sights appearing before them. "I don't think we're on the right trail," she said, stopping short. "There is a colony of the very ferns we had been searching for all day. A great deal finer specimens than those Professor Langham found. He said there were much larger and finer ones on another part of the mountain, don't you know? We surely would not have passed these by unnoticed." "Well," said Ester, moving on slowly, "what of it? We are in the same general direction, at least, and the path is good. I presume it runs into the other trail, even if we are off." But Faith knew mountain trails better than that. Two fairly good roads would not be in the least likely to run parallel with each other for many rods. She moved forward, also, because in doubt what else to do, but her anxiety increased with every step. They came presently to another trail, and stopped. "There!" said Faith. "Now I know we are wrong. We certainly did not pass a distinctly defined path like this." No, Ester admitted that they did not. But it might be the path that would lead them to the main trail. Neither knew anything better to do than to make trial of it, and they walked rapidly, until it grew less distinct, and made several bewildering curves. They were silent now, each becoming increasingly sure that they were traveling over ground that they had never tried before. After a little, they turned back, becoming convinced by the increasing obscurity of the trail that it was not a direct path to any well known point. But in turning back they found themselves bewildered, and stopped several times to argue as to which of the slight openings that looked like trails they had made use of. And they did not reach the clear trail, as they felt certain that it was time for them to do. At last Faith made a full stop, and looked her companion steadily in the face. "Ester," she said solemnly, "you and I are lost." CHAPTER XII.